guys. Love a little Jingle Bell Jazz. That was actually the name of that song, Jingle Bells Jazz. Thank you, Druid. Yeah, happy Friday. Hey, Robin. Oh my goodness. Where has the week gone? I say that all the time. Um, yeah, staying warm. It has been quite the temperature ride this week. We had like a cold, well, we had a couple cold nights, and then it was really cold yesterday, but then overnight it was warmer, but now it's cold again. I don't know. We're getting, I don't know, lake effect, nor'easter, who knows. My mom said they were calling for flurries down her way in Virginia. I haven't heard one way or the other up here. I'm like, I was listening to the news and not the weather. So anyway, I do hope everyone is staying warm. 'Tis the season, right? So I have something this today that I hope is going to be interesting. I had mentioned, I don't know, it's probably over the summer. It's been a while ago. I had asked, is anybody interested in looking at my artwork? And everybody so graciously said yes. And I don't know if you guys were just being nice or what, but we're going to look at one of my quilts today. And it is got an extensive story to it, and I'm gonna bore you guys with all the history. So hopefully it's not really boring. Hopefully it's interesting to you. And it was kind of fun. I was just looking at it this morning to make sure. I'll explain more when I get to it, but just to make sure everything was working on the website. And I was kind of like, oh, I'd forgotten of some of this. This is interesting stuff. So I hope you enjoy it too. Before we get started, though, I wanted to update you on my tiny little project here. This was not a child's craft. So if you remember the other day, I showed off all the little pieces and parts and this fun, cute little thing. And it had little plastic clamshells of all of the supplies. And, yeah, like the little gingerbread cookies were on a sheet tray, everything. I mean, just so adorable. And you use this little teeny tiny jar of, UV gel to put this thing together. And yes, it is absolutely adorable, but oh my gosh, first of all, I almost went blind trying to get this stuff in there. And they give you these horrible little plastic tweezers. I had to use real tweezers. Those little plastic tweezers were not cutting it. And then I realized after I started doing the UV gel, I have one of those little nail art UV lights. I realized I forgot to put the sugar on it. So I had to go back in, add more of the UV gel, and then do the sugar. So I don't know if you can see. I'm trying to not get it to fall off. I was gonna use some double-sided tape to tape the little thing down. But here's the real bummer about this. Now, these little sets, there were 4 different ones. I got the little Yule log, which is adorable. There's also a charcuterie platter, also adorable, and then like a little Christmas tree that was okay, but not stellar. And then of course there were the Marty Moose glasses from National Lampoon's Holiday Vacation or Christmas Vacation, and that's the rare one. So, but look at this. Doesn't fit together. Not really an ornament. I was so bummed about this. Like, I can't just glue this thing together and make it like a little hanging ornament. So I'm guessing this works for the charcuterie platter and maybe the Marty Moose mugs. It does not work for the Yule log because the Yule log sits up too high. So fail. But yes, it is very cute. And I think that I have some extra little decorations. There's 2 cookies left and some of the little sprigs and the berries. So maybe make something else with those. But yeah, the little itty bitty mushrooms. I don't know if you can see that right there. So dang cute. So easily slipping out of tweezers. You should have seen me. I was trying to shoo my cats away because, of course, they wanted to investigate. They were like, oh, what are you doing? Something with glue? run something around the edge to raise it up. Yeah, I guess I could do that. Anyway, it was cute. It was fun. I definitely would not recommend buying that for a small child. I would say a teenager and maybe a advanced middle schooler might have the abilities, but I really think it's the kind of thing that if a child, you know, were to get that, they would definitely need adult help. And you know, when I think about it, one of the rare versions of this thing is the Marty Moose glasses. I mean, I don't think the National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation is like all that terrible. I mean, it's kind of a family movie, but it's really not for children. And I mean, at this point, kids probably don't even get the references in that movie. So, I think this is adult crafting in disguise as children's crafting. So, anyway, for what it's worth, it was a fun little craft. My advent calendar has given me more. See, so if you may remember Angelica from Rugrats, the little toy. Well, I got Chucky. And this little thing, I don't remember what this is. If you could even see this very well. It's like a little monster. It says Iki's figurine. This was like from the Wild Thornberries, maybe? I don't know. This was something I don't remember if my son watched or not. And then finally, there's this little guy, was what I got today, which I have seen these in the store. They're very cute. They're little, it's like a little thing that it's got little arms and it would go on your finger, like a little finger puppet. But what's really funny is, I don't know if you'll be able to see, the side there, it's only half the monkey. Because it's not meant to actually come out of the package. So the little figurine inside is only half the monkey. So very cute. Looks just like the real deal. So these have been fun. You know, not toys that I played with as a child, but you know, my niece and nephew and my son did. So that's all the tiny updates I have for you. So just a little heads up about some stuff we're doing over on Quilt Nerding for folks that don't get over there very often, or, you know, just maybe not interested in what we're doing or just haven't had time. We've stopped reading books for the month of December. We had been doing a book about every 6 weeks. And we decided to cut back a little bit because the books are hard. And, you know, sometimes it's a challenge to get your reading done. I know for folks, especially this time of year, it was challenging for us to get our reading done. But what we've decided to do for January, so starting sometime in January, we will start this book. It's The Dress Diary of Mrs. Anne Sykes by Kate Straston. It came out earlier this year, and it came out in 2013. And then earlier this year, it came out in softcover. I think this is the version that was released in the UK. If you look it up on Amazon, it's on Amazon. It's like $13. The front cover of it looks different, but it's the same book. So we're going to start reading this. This is so interesting from what I've seen so far. I read the preface. Basically, this woman, Kate Straston, was gifted with this like ledger notebook full of dress fabric scraps, and it's almost like a diary there. And I tried to show Jill, so I know that you're not gonna be able to see it, but around each of these scraps is this itty bitty tiny little copper plate writing. It just does not show up on camera, but it's there. And so Kate Straston went through and read all this stuff and looked at all these fabrics. And I think she spent like 6 years maybe researching, and kind of came up with this narrative, the story. So I'm interested to hear, you know, what these things are about, and, you know, learning about this woman from the 19th century through her dress diary. So this seems like it's going to be something fun. So that is what we will be reading at the beginning of the year. So if you wanted to get yourself a little gifty, or ask somebody to get you a little gifty of a book, it's a good book. Also, something we have decided to do, I don't know if any of you are QuiltCon rejects. I'm a 5-time QuiltCon reject. And so I stopped submitting a couple years ago just because I'm like, my quilts don't necessarily fit into any of the categories, really. And I really make more art quilts than modern quilts. Although in recent years, I have seen quilts very similar to quilts that I submitted in the past. And, does that get me a little irritated and jaded? Yeah, it does. But what Jill and I decided to do is to do a QuiltCon reject show. And so we're inviting people. We're not going to just go out there and take people's pictures. We want them to be submitted to us. So if you know somebody that submitted to QuiltCon and is a QuiltCon reject, give them quiltnerding at gmail.com or any of our social media. And I think Jill is putting together a form for submission, but we just decided on this like today. So we don't have all the details really baked yet, but keep that in mind. Let people know, because we want to be able to showcase those things. I know, I can sit here and be jaded and stuff, but I understand like the absolute onslaught of submissions they get, and the judges, or the jury, the QuiltCon is both juried and judged. So what that means is there's jurying that decides what quilts are going to get into the show, and then judging determines like who the winner is in each category. So the jury and the judges have a really difficult job to do, and by no means do I mean to throw them under the bus or say anything bad about them. There has been controversy in the past, and I've made some observations about the jurying in the past that kind of, I don't know, it ruffles my feathers a little bit. But yeah, I think that giving and it's such a sad title, QuiltCon rejects. On one hand, it's a little tongue-in-cheek. It's kind of making fun of yourself. Some of the quilts over the years have just been so fantastic. And I think they deserve to be seen outside of their makers' social media. So we're going to be doing that. And I don't have a date for that episode yet, but keep it in mind. And again, if there's somebody that that would like to submit their quilt, and I promise we're only going to say good things, let them know that we're doing this. And hey, Mom is a fan. So we want to be able to showcase those, and it's always nice to get your stuff out there in many ways. So Mama, I don't know if you just heard what I was saying, but over on Quilt Nerding, the show that I do with my friend Jill, on Tuesday nights, we're soliciting folks that submitted to QuiltCon and didn't get in. And the Instagram hashtag QuiltCon reject. We want to see those folks and put their quilts out there on our little platform for what it's worth. So let folks know. Yeah, I'm a 5-time QuiltCon reject. I joked when I got my 5th rejection, I was like, all right, I'm done. I joked around, like, how Saturday Night Live, if you have been a host for 5 times, you're in the 5-timers club. So I'm always like, where's my quilt coat? I need a quilt jacket. Oh, right, quiltish. Yes, there are definitely some beauties that don't get in. And again, I have to drive home the fact that I get it. I understand. It is so hard to judge and jury these things. And I think some judges and jurors kind of go in there with a mindset, what they're looking for. And as somebody who has volunteered at QuiltCon, I've seen the quilts that when they come down and what it looks like, what the room looks like, where they stage them all and get them prepared to send back to their makers, or to go on to other shows. I know one year, I'm trying to think who it was, Sherilyn Wood. I got to take down her exhibit. She had a special exhibit at QuiltCon, and I got to take down her exhibit. And like everything had to be packed a certain way because it wasn't actually, I don't think it was actually going back to her. It was going on to its next destination for a show. So, but anyway, just handling all that stuff and just looking at what did get in is such a huge, massive pile. And I think the QuiltCon folks, if I remember correctly, the Modern Quilt Guild, they said, I'm trying to think of something to the effect, if they get 10 times more submissions than they can actually let in. So, by virtue of that, there are absolutely some fantastic work that's just not going to get in. So I want to, give a nod to the rejects. And it's a mighty little club that we have. So, all right. Are you guys ready to look at this quilt? I'm just going to jump into it and not give you a whole lot of background, because what you're going to see gives you all the background you need to know. For those of you that are sewing or doing other things, I'll read all the captions. So this quilt was made in 2022. Let me get my other screen here. Is the right one? Yeah. Oh, actually, let me move the chat. Come on, chat. I don't know where it makes sense to put it. All right, I'll put it here. Okay. So this is just the corner of the quilt. The title of the quilt is Trivia Night at Disney's Tavern. And Ellicott City is what this quilt is about. And Ellicott City is a little bit older than the United States. So they were celebrating their 250th anniversary in 2022. Their sesquicentennial, or their quarter millennial. And so this quilt is about Ellicott City and about the celebration of this town. But the way they went about it was kind of interesting. The artists that were, this was juried, the artists that were allowed in and selected had to submit a proposal of what they were doing, and it was based on some artifacts in the County Historical Society. So I will go ahead and read the artist statement. And we'll look at the quilt, the whole quilt, in a second. You'll be able to see the whole thing. So my artist statement is as follows. As a textile artist, history nerd, and small town girl, I'm thrilled to participate in EC250 artifacts. And that's what they called it, with the artifacts. The town where I grew up is similar to Ellicott City in historical significance and modern charm. It was easy to fall in love walking down Main Street after moving to Maryland 26 years ago. I've now lived here for 28 years. My quilt is influenced by Baltimore album quilts and story quilts of the 19th century. Now, a little aside here, for folks that are Baltimore album quilt scholars, I understand where you'll look at my quilt and say, Baltimore album quilt influence, but there are aspects of my quilt, and it's done in my style, that is a call to maybe not high style Baltimore album quilts, because those are very, very intricate, but a call to Baltimore album quilts in general, and album quilts specifically. Baltimore album and story quilts of the 19th century, with a dose of my own graphic style and signature sewing techniques. Each block features interpretations of people, places, and events associated with Ellicott City. My inspiration artifact, which is what we had to determine, the aid memoir, has its own double block, which is, it's the one right here. If you can see my mouse, it's the one right here. Initial sketches and research for the quilt fed my love of trivia, and the idea of a mythical trivia night at Disney's Tavern was born. Disney's Tavern is one of the historic places in Ellicott City. What if the aid memoir was our ancestors' stand-in for the forbidden smartphone at such an event? If you've ever been to a trivia night, you know you're not allowed to look at your phone. You're supposed to know the trivia, not cheat. Although some of the subjects are serious in nature, the quilt overall is meant to be whimsical. And then you can see the actual artifact, the aid memoir, that is at the Howard County Historical Society. And it's actually a really neat artifact. And what's interesting is it has every day of the week but Sunday, and it's because Sunday is a day of rest. You should not be taking notes on Sunday. That's what people told me. The artist, I'm not gonna to spend a whole lot of time on here, but I'm a fourth generation quilter. I'm a Virginia native. I've been in Maryland longer than I lived in Virginia at this point. So, also to mention, and you guys know this about me, my profession is instructional systems design and development. And so what you're actually looking at is something I put together in the vein of interactive training that I do for companies. So part of this presentation was also to let people know, hey, I'm available for hire to do this kind of stuff. I don't think I got any jobs off of this one, but okay. So I will, depending on time, I will come back to this slide. But what I did for quilters is that I broke down each block and explained what the techniques were. But I will come back to that, just depending on time. And then the show, let me talk about the show a little bit. So the EC250 Artifacts exhibit commemorates the 250th anniversary of the founding of Ellicott City. Participating artists were assigned an artifact from the Howard County Historical Society collection and asked to create a piece of artwork inspired by the artifact. And you can see this was the card that, like the show card, the postcard that they sent out for the show. And you can see over here on the right hand side is an embroidery that I want to say it was in one of the Ellicott homes. So Ellicott City is named after three brothers, and we'll get there. But I want to say this was from one of the Ellicott homes, and the artist made this, if I remember correctly, this is like a cut paper thing that is meant to replicate this stitched item. And it was really neat. This artist her stuff was just amazing. So that was an example. Her name was Jennifer Hudson. So my assigned artifact is M206215, an aide memoir. This little device was the pocket notebook of the day. Because paper was expensive and ink was messy and not particularly portable, the aide memoir was a helpful item to own. It consists of very thin ivory pages. Later models may have used celluloid, which is an early plastic, which were riveted together at the bottom edge. To use it, the pages are fanned out and you write on them with a pencil, and then the pencil marks can be easily wiped away with a wet cloth. Okay, so let's get to the quilt itself. So this was a really tough quilt to photograph, as really most quilts are, but because, if you photograph a quilt that is, maybe like a 2-color quilt or, something that's a kind of a consistent pattern, even though it's still hard to photograph, it's a little bit easier because you've got the consistency of repetition to kind of find the lighting, This was a really hard one, and my husband did his best, but some of the pictures are, there's a little bit of like overexposure and glare in them. So we'll just start, let's start with the border. Okay, apparently that one doesn't go anywhere. Okay, we'll start with this block. So this block is called Follow the North Star. And while trivia night at Disney's Tavern is meant to be whimsical and a little tongue-in-cheek, this block is more serious and intended to honor the enslaved and free persons of color in and around Ellicott City pre-emancipation. And I'll read I have additional information, some of the historical stuff. So the old Ellicott City Jail is a stop on the National Parks Network to Freedom list. And I actually visited I walked around the city and I visited the spot where they have this freedom list, and you're looking down into the old jail, like the place where, and part of the building still exists. So with MPS info and little help from the Howard County Historical Society, as well as my own research, I was able to find a handful of names who were imprisoned and or involved in local trials related to freedom seeking and abolitionist activities. And I can point out some of the names in a minute. One exception was an 8-year-old child, who was held there for murder. My research suggests that there were many more unnamed people of color held in the jail for various crimes, and I'm putting crimes in quotes because they were held for ridiculous things that were not crimes. While the imprisonment of freedom seekers is nothing to be proud of, I believe it is important to remember, document, and examine the sins of the past. Most importantly, so that we do not repeat them, but also so that we can identify how far we've come and measure how far we have yet to go. The title of the block, Follow the North Star, is a reference to stories of the Underground Railroad, where freedom seekers were told to use the stars to navigate at night. And if I go back to this one, I just to point out some of the names. I believe Augustus Spriggs and William Chaplin were conductors on the Underground Railroad. And then the women listed here, Juno Crocus, Eliza Crocus, and Rachel Parker. Their situation, Rachel Parker was a freedom seeker who ran from her place of enslavement. And I believe it was here in Baltimore County where I live. And she was sought by Howard County. The counties were a little bizarre. They kind of changed borders and lines. So back in the 1700s, Baltimore County was really more bigger and more of a thing than when Howard County annexed pieces of the county. So unfortunately, Rachel Parker fled, and it was assumed she went to Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, they found a woman named Juno Crocus and her mother Eliza Crocus, and they claimed that she was actually Rachel Parker. And Juno was brought back from Pennsylvania, or I don't want to say brought back, she was brought from Pennsylvania to Maryland and incarcerated. She maintained she was not Rachel Parker, and I believe there was a trial. There was like a multi-part trial. And I mean, this is something that is really kind of mind-boggling, that they would expend all of this energy on what was really probably mistaken identity, and just disgusting that they would hunt this woman down in the first place. But to apprehend a woman who was just living her life as a free person of color and tell her, you are this person who ran away, and that's all there is to it. There's lots of stories like that, and it's really disheartening and pretty disgusting part of the history. And, you know, while I've said this quilt is really whimsical and you know, it's important, I think, to observe some of these things too. Yeah, there, you know, Ellicott City is not all, you know, smiles and fun mills. Charles Barnes, I believe, is the child who was the 8-year-old child who was held. And then there are just random names of people that are just listed as being incarcerated, excuse me, at the jail. No last names were given. They were just given, you know, descriptions, Belle, Dick, and Bob. So, and the other names in here are Warner Cook, I believe, was also involved in abolition activities. The Collins family was an entire family who was locked up. Amos Green, Richard Martin, and Ned Bile were other names. Okay, a little bit happier block is the women of Ellicott City. And we know in the 18th and 19th century, women did not have a lot of rights. But there were some women that kind of made a name for themselves in Ellicott City. Deborah Disney, being the owner of Disney's Tavern, which was the tavern that the name of this quilt is based on. The efforts of numerous women went into making Ellicott City what it is today. This block is dedicated to all the women who fought for the right to vote, the right to own property and engage in business, and the rights of all citizens under the U.S. Constitution. I chose to highlight just 3 of them: Anne Tong, Deborah Disney, and Martha Ellicott Tyson. Little is actually documented about Anne Tong. They think she was born in 1792. She did die in 1863. Other than land and probate records that reveal she was a widow and a property owner. Now, her widowhood is really what allowed her to own property. But her legacy lives today in the group of buildings originally built as rental homes for mill workers on Columbia Turnpike, which is now known as Old Columbia Pike. If you know Ellicott City, you know what I'm talking about. Often misnamed Tongue. Tong Row houses a number of businesses today and is a prominent feature of historic Ellicott City. Deborah Disney, who is the Disney referenced in the name of the quilt, was also a property owner, which was very uncommon for women at the time. Disney's Tavern, which we have the location of that on Main Street, has still got the plaque and everything. operated under her ownership from 1840 to 1862. 1862, we've got the Civil War coming in, and I think at that point she sold or relinquished the business. I can't remember the details. But it is documented as one of the oldest still standing structures in Ellicott City, and it bears a historical marker. Quite a bit more is known about Martha Ellicott Tyson, who was born in 1795. She's the granddaughter of city founder Andrew Ellicott, who is not to be confused with Major Andrew Ellicott, who is his nephew. You'll love it when they name everybody the same names. Among notable accomplishments, Martha was co-founder of Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania, the author of multiple books, including 2 about Benjamin Banneker, and we will hear about him in a little bit, and a lifelong advocate for abolition and women's rights. So this is Benjamin Banneker and Major Andrew Ellicott. The Autodidact and the Land Surveyor is the title of this block. And this block represents a partnership between Benjamin Banneker and Major Andrew Ellicott, who is the nephew of Ellicott City founder Andrew Ellicott. While Banneker was born a free man across the river in Oella, which is in Baltimore County, he was very much a part of Ellicott City by virtue of his friendship with George Ellicott, who was the son of Andrew Ellicott. At a time when many Americans were illiterate, Banneker, a black man who normally would have been afforded even fewer opportunities, received a formal education as a child and eventually taught himself advanced topics in science and mathematics. While Banneker had numerous accomplishments, he is often known as one of the men who assisted George's cousin Andrew in surveying the nation's capital in 1791. And the nota bene that I added here is that I did use the Capitol in the block to represent Washington, D.C., but the original Capitol building was constructed in 1793, and Benjamin Banneker and Major Ellicott were not involved in that construction. I was just waiting for somebody to call me out on that. Okay, so this block, which is the mill, I believe it's called the Millstone block or mill block. That information is in the quilter section. This one's called Wheat, Not Tobacco, and this refers to some of the mills established in Ellicott City, or Ellicott Mills as it was originally known. The Ellicott brothers were John, Andrew, and Joseph, who were Quakers from Pennsylvania, who made a huge impact on this area. The first grist mill, however, was built by James Hood in 1766 on the banks of the Patapsco, which is the major river that runs through this area. That was 5 years before the Ellicotts' arrival. Hood, or possibly his son, went on to sell the mill to Joseph Ellicott in 1774. The Ellicotts were instrumental in improving early agricultural efforts in Maryland by persuading local farmers to switch from planting tobacco to planting wheat. This was an important shift for the quality and health of the soil, and no doubt a boon for a family who went on to own numerous mills. I think the Ellicotts were worth a lot of cha-ching. Throughout the early and mid-1800s, the Ellicotts amassed ownership in multiple flour mills, a granite quarry, a sawmill, and a plaster mill. And this is some trivia. Plaster, which produced plaster of Paris, was used as fertilizer. That was really interesting to me. I had no idea about that until I read the details. Okay, so this block documents something that's a little more modern. This one's called Enchantment. And Marylanders of a certain age will surely remember the Enchanted Forest, while younger folks may only be familiar with the Pointing King from his current location atop the Enchanted Forest Shopping Center sign. So he sits right in front of a Safeway. And he's a major landmark in Ellicott City today. The Enchanted Forest was a small theme park similar to many others popular in the mid-20th century. Others were located in Michigan, New Jersey, New York, Oregon, and South Dakota. As a toddler, my grandmother took me to a very similar park in Woodbridge, Virginia, named Storybook Land. While I never visited the Enchanted Forest during its operation, it closed down literally the year before I moved here. I am nonetheless sentimental for it based on my experiences at Storybook Land. Keep in mind, these were not the theme parks of today. No Disney merch, no Six Flags roller coasters. It consisted of fairy tale inspired playground type structures and statues. The Enchanted Forest appears in a number of movies and TV programs, most notably in John Waters' movie Cry Baby, featuring Johnny Depp and Ricky Lake. Many of the structures and figures have since been moved to Clark's Ely Oak Farm in Columbia, where they continue to delight children. And between me and you and anybody else that watches this, I know where one of the rabbits is, and it is not at Clark's Ely Oak Farm. There was somebody, I think, that was involved in restoration of these, and one of the rabbits got set out for the junk, in the junk pile, and a friend of mine snagged it. So I do know of its location. One day it shall be mine. Oh, come on now. Okay. Little Sneedville. This was a piece of trivia that I think a lot of people did not know. So in 1771, this is the ultimately the history of Ellicott City. In 1771, 3 Pennsylvanian Quakers, brothers John, Andrew, and Joseph Ellicott, chose an undeveloped area along the top of the Patapsco River to build a flour mill. By 1772, Ellicott Mills was established. Its name was changed to Ellicott City via an incorporation charter in 1867. So that would have been post-Civil War. So I found anecdotal evidence that the area was nicknamed Little Sneedville for a time, although this seems to be refuted by some. As the story goes, a large group of itinerant workers from Sneedville, Tennessee, settled in Ellicott City to work the mills, earning the area this moniker. Who knows if it's really true, but Sneedville is a funny name. That sounds like it came from a Dr. Seuss story. If you live in Maryland, you've surely heard the modern tagline, Ellicott City Strong, or EC Strong. The sentiment was developed by a Catonsville business in partnership with the Chamber of Commerce and printed on t-shirts as a fundraiser for Ellicott City following the devastating 2016 flood. I've since seen it used as a symbol of Ellicott City's tenacity. So that's, let me go back to here. You can see I put Ellicott Mills, Little Sneedville, and EC Strong here. And this is a map. This is the topographical, or the, I guess you call topographical shows elevations and stuff. But this is like an overhead map of Ellicott City, and you can see some of the little rivers and tributaries. This is the Patapsco. It's the big. And so this being Ellicott City, and then over here on the other side of the river is Oella, where Benjamin Banneker is from. So this one's called Backwater, and you see some turtles. Double T, you can't see him, but he's excited about this one. So this one's called Backwater. The indigenous people of central Maryland left no written records, as their language and traditions were passed orally through generations. The first documentation of the people living in the area was made by Captain John Smith as he explored the Chesapeake in 1608. While the area where Ellicott City sits was wilderness, Smith identified the inhabitants closest to Ellicott City as the Piscataway. And from what I understand, the actual site of Ellicott City, in terms of any kind of building and dredging and all that kind of stuff, I don't think that they have found any evidence of any indigenous people having settled there. It really was truly wilderness there. We now know that bands of the Piscataway tribe are part of the Algonquin people. By the time Captain Smith rolled through, the Piscataway had been living adjacent to the Chesapeake for thousands of years and were organized with other Algonquin tribes under the Powhatan Confederacy. Today, the Piscataway people remaining in Maryland live primarily in southern Maryland. Not long ago, I was privileged to attend an educational event and see examples of their traditional dances. The Patapsco River is an ever-present character in the story of Ellicott City. Its name is derived from the Algonquin word or phrase for tide covered with froth. Isn't that lovely? Or backwater. And the word is potapskut. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that properly, but, I don't know how they bastardized that into Patapsco, but I'm guessing it sounded to the settlers here, it sounded something like that. And I'm saying maybe something was lost in translation. The turtles are a nod to the traditions of the people, as well as a representation of terrapins, native to Central Maryland, and terps, native to Maryland's university system. Because University of Maryland is the terrapins. And by the way, have you ever heard an old timer say Patapsco? Among other creative spellings, the name was actually spelled that way for a time. So stop correcting your grandparents. This is one of my favorites. So this is the Tom Thumb race. If I had to pick the most whimsical event in Ellicott City history, the time a horse supposedly raced a train engine would win hands down. This block is about the Tom Thumb race of 1830. This is also a little bit of embroidery purse. And you can see the horse is much larger than the train engine. So 1830. Trains were a flashy, newfangled mode of transportation in the early 1800s that can reach up to, get this, 14 miles an hour. And they didn't get tired or have to stop and eat like a horse. It was truly mind-blowing. The B&O Railroad came to town and started with tracks that connected Baltimore City to Ellicott Mills. As you may know, the Ellicott City train station is the oldest surviving train depot in the United States. Allegedly, the creator of a steam locomotive called Tom Thumb, and there is a replica of Tom Thumb available for view in Baltimore. The creator of the steam locomotive raced a horse-drawn carriage along this new stretch of train tracks. The locomotive was far ahead of the horse until something broke and the horse ended up winning the race. I've heard that this story is pure myth, and I've also heard it was a real event that people gathered to watch. A cursory search of the Baltimore Sun archives never turned up anything, so I suppose I'll have to go with the former explanation. The Sun seemed to have all the hot gossip of the time, so I doubt they would have missed it if it really happened, right? It's still a great story. There are literally stories that have, like, I can't even remember, 1830 was that Andrew Jackson. I can't even remember what president they claim, like, came and saw this, and the governor and all this kind of stuff. But I think there is kind of a logical explanation to it, that there just happened to be a carriage and, horse-drawn carriage at the time. This one is called Granite. The Horn of Plenty, or cornucopia, is a common image in traditional Baltimore album quilts. To this cornucopia, I added wheat, common Maryland native wildflowers, black-eyed Susan, our state flower, a trumpet flower, and Ordovician, I know I've never pronounced this right, Ordovician granodiorite, aka granite, aka gneiss, aka MC Granny Gneiss. But for real, Ellicott City has its own unique whatever. I was going to call it OG. I dove down a deep rabbit hole to figure out how to explain this granite. God bless the geologist. That was quite an education. My brain hurt after I tried to find out about this granite. So, Ordovician is the period the rock was formed. Granodiorite is the stuff they dug out of the quarries. And remember, the Ellicott brothers owned a quarry. According to historical accounts, there were 2 Ellicott City quarries, one on either side of the Patapsco. The rock on the eastern side of the river in Baltimore County was more gneissic, which is metamorphic, or rock formed from great pressure. I forgot some of these. These ridiculous things I put in here. I understand that pressure. The rock had to succeed, The rock on the western side of the river in Howard County was more granity, which is igneous, or rock formed from lava, which is just a little cooler than the cheese on a slice of pizza. I'm such a corny person. To make matters more complicated, there is something called schist thrown in, which is either young granite or soft gneiss. And the TLDR of this is Ellicott City has its own special geology. It's made of a stew of rocks. But this granite is specific to Ellicott City. And what they're mining on one side of the river is completely different than what they mined on the other side of the river for these quarries. And it's really not a very huge area. This is all pretty close together. All right, I'm going to skip the middle block for now. So this one's called Ghost. One aspect of Ellicott City's charm lies in the ghost stories. Many historic U.S. towns boast of ghosts, but Ellicott City colloquially has more ghosts per building than other haunted cities. And a good friend of mine she works for the Historical Society down and does ghost tours in Ellicott City, and I've been on her ghost tour. Some of the ghosts are pranksters, some are drama queens, and one is a little white cat referred to as Casper. Some of the ghosts have tragic stories, others just sound like jerks. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, Ellicott City is home to several fantastic ghost tour groups, which offer both family-friendly ghost walks and adult-only ghost pub tours. There's a lot of bars and restaurants in Ellicott City, and you can pub hop and hear the horrible ghost stories. I mean, some of them are terrible. Like, go sit at that table over there in the judge's bench maybe it's not the judge's bench. It's one of the bars that is in part of an old sawmill. Like, go sit at that table over there. That's where they found the what do you call them? The CFO or whatever, the accountant. They found him hanging there. Like, oh God, these are terrible. But back to that block, you can see this is the little cat, little Casper. And I can't remember. Casper haunts, oh shoot, I'm drawing a blank. It's one of the breweries has a bar there, a brew pub, and he haunts their brew pub. To the point where they claim that they've seen like little cat footprints and stuff. And I'm like, well, could that just be a white cat? A lot of people joked about that. Like, yeah, it's just a white cat. This block is called the Floods. And the flood block covers another more serious topic. The very thing that made Ellicott City a perfect spot for a mill town, proximity to two rivers, the Patapsco and the Tiber, is also one of its greatest threats. Now, the Tiber River is not really that much of a river anymore because of the way that, the Patapsco has been dammed and, just the changing patterns. But literally as you walk through this little city like Tong Row, you kind of walk down under and you can literally stand and look. Some of these buildings are built up on little stilts. They're literally built right over the water. So it's really not surprising when the floods happen, even though they're very tragic. Ellicott City has been pummeled by flooding an absurd number of times. The dates stitched across the water are significant flood years. The city has also been subject to catastrophic floods, with 2 in the past decade. These are the dates stitched in the window and door of the house. The dry flood of 1868 was said to have claimed dozens of lives. Local reports say 43, others report higher numbers. Although I couldn't find documentation of any fatalities in the Hurricane Agnes flooding of 1972, it was no less devastating to the city. Sadly, 3 lives were lost in the more recent floods. In 2016, Jessica Watsula and Joseph Anthony Blevins drowned attempting to escape when their vehicles were overtaken by floodwaters. In 2018, Sergeant Eddie Herman, a National Guardsman and retired airman, was swept away and drowned when he rushed into the floodwaters to assist a person in distress. And as tragic as that is, I really have to... This man was a hero. This man was sitting in a restaurant that I have been to many times when the flood started. And he was there really just, I think he was, it was like a birthday lunch for friends. And he saw somebody in distress and the floodwaters coming. And he ran outside and lost his life trying to help somebody. So, that's the true, absolutely true definition of a hero, in my opinion. Despite these tragedies and the destructive pounding Mother Nature dishes out, Ellicott City remains the little city that could. Residents, business people, and local organizations have rallied together to help each other and to rebuild. After 250 years, it still stands strong and proud, and we could all take a page from its book. And my husband has been very involved with the flood cleanups because his park is literally right there. So this block is called Culture and Community. A modern development in the diversity of Greater Ellicott City is its vibrant Korean community. In support of the local Korean-owned businesses, which is the time I made the quilt was approximately 170. There might be more now. And in honor of the Korean Americans living in the area, Governor Larry Hogan and Maryland First Lady Yumi Hogan dedicated a 5-mile stretch of U.S. Route 40 in Ellicott City as Korean Way in 2016. Known as Koreatown, the area is marked by distinctive tile-roofed palace-type signs. In the Culture and Community block, I pay homage to Koreatown with motifs and techniques that are specific to Korean culture. The center medallion is an example of a Korean quilting technique known as seksilnubi. And I took a class in this from the amazing Youngmin Lee. She's a Bojagi artist. The flowers on either side represent the national flower of South Korea, the hibiscus or rose of Sharon. And so I'll go back to this block, the bigger version of it, but you can see that 5-petaled flower. And that's easy to remember when you see that on a quilt, that it's the Rose of Sharon. The Korean text between culture and community says friendship, while the text at the bottom says Koreatown. So, okay, so this is the one that says, so this one says Koreatown here. And yeah, friendship is the one up here. And oh my gosh, the number of times I double checked. I was like, I want to make sure that I don't put this text upside down, that I don't represent it incorrectly. But you can see the seksilnubi is really an interesting type of quilting where as you quilt it, you're stuffing these twisted cords of mulberry paper in between the layers. And so it kind of takes on this echo quilting sort of look as you stuff that cord in there. It's really neat. It's a really neat technique. Okay. This one is called 7 Hills. I looked into spooky tales as I made the ghost block and stumbled upon several anecdotal and quite questionable stories concerning the demon truck of 7 Hills Road, which is a ghost story linked to College Avenue. Sadly, the road has been the site of many car accidents caused by drivers speeding over the 7 Hills. But the reference to 7 Hills is what really caught my eye because of the 7 Hills of Rome. Rome is situated among 7 hills which form the boundaries of the city. It is also nestled beside the Tiber River. Guess what other city has 7 hills and a Tiber River? Ellicott City is not the only location to place itself in the 7 hills just like Rome category. Dozens of cities all over the world boast about their 7 hills, which I guess is a weird flex. Certainly in the case of Ellicott City, neoclassicism was quite popular in its early days, and it's not bad marketing. If Washington, D.C. can make that claim, why can't Ellicott City? They didn't even have a Tiber River, for crying out loud. Mount Misery, the site of the Howard County Courthouse, has been referred to as a Capitoline Hill, which is the location of Rome City Hall. Mount Misery is called such because there was a hospital, I believe it was a hospital at the top of it, a miserable place. But it is also, to climb it, there's literally stairs to some of, like, down the sides of it that are almost completely straight up and down. They're almost like ladders. It's crazy. And there's parking lots at the top. So if you can't find parking in the city itself, and you imagine small towns, parking's at a premium. You have to park up there in a parking lot. You will be calling it Mount Misery too. Okay, this one's called Faith and Wisdom. Over the 6 months I researched Ellicott City, I ran across numerous institutions. The city has been the home to many churches and schools over the past 2.5 centuries. Although the educational offerings and resources were in stark contrast, the Ellicott City Colored School and the Patapsco Female Institute are 2 well-known historic schools in Ellicott City. A number of parochial schools also have roots in the city. Today, the Howard County Public School District is located in Ellicott City and represents some of the best-ranked schools in the state. As for churches, one source I consulted claims there are 45 churches in Ellicott City, representing 15 denominations. From its Quaker beginnings, the area has grown into a region of diverse faith. And the last block is the aide memoir. The aide memoir block references my inspiration object, an antique aide memoir, and serves as the explanation for the title of the quilt. The imaginary trivia night at Disney's Tavern surely had a rule against bringing in cheat sheets. And what is it here in the text? It says aide memoir at the top. And then there's a little definition of what an aide memoir is, so people viewing the quilt could understand. And I have a little thing here that says, Agnes, you can't bring your aide memoir to trivia night. It's cheating. So, leave your aide memoir in your reticule, ladies, they might say. Just like the modern trivia night host says, smartphones must stay in your pocket, folks. The real scoop on aide memoirs is that they were like the Post-it notes of the day. They were made of extremely thin slices of ivory sandwiched between covers. And I had already kind of read about this, so the pages could be fanned out. Since paper was expensive and ink did not yet come in handy ballpoint pens, a person could use a pencil to jot down reminders for the week on the ivory pages. At the end of the week, the pencil marks were easily wiped off with a wet cloth, so they were also like tiny dry erase boards of the day. So, for quilters, I'm going to kind of race through these. Let me, before I do that, I'm going to give you guys the link. If you want to look at this, no hard feelings if you don't. But if you wanted to go and explore this, I'll pop this in the... Okay. So, let me go ahead and kind of read the introduction. Trivia night at Disney's Tavern was a huge undertaking, but really fun to make. When I was invited to create a piece for the exhibit, I was certain I would make a more traditional Baltimore album quilt, but as I began researching ideas and making sketches, my ideas evolved into somewhat of a story quilt. Sometimes quilts have a mind of their own, and I like it that way. I constructed the quilt using a quilt-as-you-go or pot holder technique. In this method, the blocks are created, sandwiched, and quilted individually. They are then trimmed to size and attached to each other using border strips. A wonderful book about these types of quilts is Portable Patchwork by Pamela Weeks. And I recently I showed this quilt in a AQSG hangout, and Pam was there, and I was like, you know, your book had a lot to do with this quilt. And she was like, oh my gosh, thank you. So it's really exciting to be able to tell her that. The construction technique was easy until I got to the borders. I had to do some measurement and figure out the best way to deal with mitered corners and long strips that were to be quilted separately and then added to the quilt. So there was some engineering that went into that border. With few exceptions, the fabric I used in the quilt are upcycled, salvaged, or scrap fabrics. I used materials from discarded fast fashion clothing, as well as yardage and scraps that would otherwise be collecting dust or headed for the dump. I used denim and work clothing type fabrics in memory of the mill workers. Railroad fabric features in one of the blocks and is used again in the borders as a nod to the B&O, which is the Baltimore and Ohio? Yeah, the Baltimore and Ohio. Sustainability is a big topic of discussion in the quilting community at the present time, and I really like the challenge of making something amazing out of nothing. So back to the North Star block, I used vintage velvet and table linens, and then the back of the block is old denim. And one thing that I don't think it may not have been clear is that a lot of the labels and the text in the quilt is my own hand inking. This isn't my handwriting, but it's kind of an alphabet I created, and I changed it up a little bit. But I use fabric markers and, inking on a lot of the work I do. So the Women of Ellicott City is the simplest block. In the background is a vintage men's handkerchief featuring crowns with hand-painted metallic accents. The silhouettes were traced onto black Kona cotton from a clip art resource and appliqued with a minuscule buttonhole stitch. And then more vintage linens. Banneker and Ellicott, as well as the Capitol building, were embroidered. And then I cut out those little embroideries and appliqued them to the block. The Mariner's compass and the little scalloped border around it were made using English paper piecing because I wasn't about to try and piece that mariner's compass like straight from little tiny strips. I was like, I will English paper piece that. Um, so I used salvage wool suiting, and I think these were mostly new fabrics in this one. So wheat not tobacco is silk taffeta and an Oxford cloth napkin. Let's see, what did I say about this one? Yeah, so the block pattern is called mill wheel, so it was an obvious choice. Each of the curved sections were hand pieced. Then the rest of the block was constructed with machine stitching. So stitching curved pieces of silk to heavy pieces of Oxford cloth was kind of a pain. I think I ended up having to stabilize some of the those center pieces because they frayed very easily. The enchanted block is just a mishmash of different kinds of fabric, upholstery fabrics, and scraps of felted wool and velvet, just to make him look opulent. And the little castle, I think, is a polished cotton to make it look sort of shiny. Little Sneedville is, it's got this wreath or medallion, and the crossbones arrangement of leaf shapes are inspired by a number of historical Baltimore almond quilts that I researched. And this one, the little applique, or the embroidery in the middle was then cut out and appliqued on. Backwater uses more upcycled denim. I really liked working with denim. It's particularly if you've got old denim that's kind of been washed a bunch and it's kind of soft. It actually, even though it's thicker, it's kind of nice to work with. It, the needle goes through it kind of nicely. This one I use, so there's these ornaments on this one. And this is one of those ones that didn't photograph very well because it's dark. But this right here, this little adornment, that's actually a very treasured piece of silk velvet that I had been saving. And I was like, you know what? This is a special block. This is a special quilt. So the Tom Thumb race. So the railroad fabric featured a completely different railroad than the B&O. And there was no locomotive that looked like Tom Thumb. So, and the horse fabric I had, it was way bigger. So, I just think it's silly. It was a silly story, so I made it look even sillier. What I had to do to make the actual little steam engine, I had to cut apart a bunch of different train images from this train fabric, and then reconstruct it to look like the Tom Thumb. Let's see, what did I say? Oh, the linen fabric was really lightweight and shifty. That's the background fabric. That was from some, oh gosh, this pair of linen pants I had, like from the early 2000s. And so I used Shape Flex to stabilize it. So if you want to sew with linen, Shape Flex from Pellon is a good choice. The granite block, I believe, is more denim on the background. And then everything is made, I think all the pieces mostly are made with either embroidery stitches or felted wool. Oh, and then this, the darker green sort of strips of the cornucopia. It's actually a skirt. It's a corduroy skirt that I can no longer fit in. So I was like, perfect. The Aide Memoir background is a vintage tablecloth. It's got stains, and I left it that way. I think everything else. Oh, so the hands are polyester double knit, and I used yarn to embroider and blanket stitch that one. Vintage dresser scarf are the cuffs, and you can see they're like a sort of an eyelet sort of thing that I cut out. And I think that's felted wool, velvet. I really dug deep into some of my treasures for this quilt. So Ghost is another one that's really similar to the other blocks. I used dyed wool. This one I used strips of dyed wool. This embroidery purse is from some clothing I had. And the ghosts are actually outlined in glow in the dark thread. So this particular block actually glows. And the quilting in it is kind of loosely sort of a spider webby kind of pattern. And then the flood block is more vintage table linens. The Koreatown block, I kind of already talked about the technique of Sik Silnubi. And I gave a shout out to Young Min Lee. So check her out. If you end up looking at this, check her out. And also, did you know that a hibiscus is also known as a Rose of Sharon? I did not know that. So that was interesting to me. Seven Hills is actually the Seven Sisters block. And this one was probably the plainest block, really. It I appliqued stars on here. I'm sorry, I embroidered these kind of stars on here on the hills. And it is what it is. It's not much else there. And then Faith and Wisdom. So this is a Caesar's crown block, and so the little points of these little house-like shapes I specifically chose to kind of look like little buildings. And that is the last one. Oh, and I saw a mistake. I saw a mistake in the coding. So that's my quilt. I had thought about getting into the details of the other piece, the inherited trauma piece that I showed you guys. I think I showed you each of the pieces, if it was earlier this week or last week. Decided not to talk about that one. I still want to talk about it because it's really important, and I kind of getting the words out about it kind of helps me, create the artist statement and all that stuff. But I decided it's too much of a bummer right now. This is the holiday season. I thought it would be better to look at something more fun. Unfortunately, a lot of my work is about, mental health and stuff like that. And sometimes the stories are pretty difficult. So I decided to stick with this one today. Yeah, so I hope you guys like that. And if you have any thoughts, thanks Quiltish. Thanks Druid. Thank you. If you guys have any thoughts about it, any questions, anything, let me know. I did win an award for the quilt. The Howard County Historical Society awarded, I think they had like 3 awards that they gave, and I won the Howard County Historical Society award. So I was pretty proud of that. That really made me feel good. There were some amazing pieces in the show, and I actually did a little video of the show, and I'll have to dig up the footage one day to show. It's not a great video, but you could see some of the other stuff in it. So I'll dig that out one day and we'll look at it. And yeah, as far as the stories, I think that a lot of the work I do, especially the stuff that is talking about mental health concerns, thank you, Robin. I'm glad you said that. And I agree with you. It's not, unfortunately, yes, my work is about mental health, and it's important. It is an important topic. It's important to talk about. I think what I mean by the unfortunately part is when I want to have a fun time. The unfortunately part is to get into the details. Sometimes it drags the energy down some. So I'll be honest, it's a little bit of self-preservation on my part, because there's a couple of the stories in there that are just kind of like, kind of getting to me right now. Oh, hey, Mod Art. Thank you. Yeah. But what I was going to say is I particularly my work that has a lot of words on it. I really only want to tell people this is about mental health. Maybe this is about depression, or this is about, imposter syndrome, or, whatever. But I really would rather people read the words on it and react to it with their own experience. And, you know, there's probably people that will look at my work and not get it. My father is one of those. I remember him telling my mother in a loud stage whisper, I don't get this shit, at one of my college shows. And I was like, great, well, you're never invited again. So, but yeah, I do think that, Robin, and that's fine. Not everybody has to understand art. Whether it's big A art, little A art, it's not for them. If they don't, people that are not interested, or just it doesn't grab them, it doesn't grab their attention, that's fine. And that's nothing. I would not disparage those people, because sometimes I'll listen to music and just be like, I don't get it. Like, why do people like this this album or the song? And it's not my aesthetic, or something about it just doesn't grab me. And there was a time when I kind of got angry and was like, oh, well, you just don't like art because you're ignorant. And yeah, that's true sometimes too. But I do think that art isn't for everyone, and not all types of art are for everyone. Some people want to look at art as something decorative, and that's fine. The people that I want to talk to are the ones that are, in the art world, and, to make the point of like, this is what you're looking at here. This isn't just a pretty piece of cloth, or a brightly colored blanket. There's more to this. So, but what I was, again, trying to get back around to is like, I like for people to form their own conclusions about my work. However, there are those pieces like this one particularly, and the inherited trauma piece, that I think that the stories matter, because you don't quite know what you're looking at without the why, the how, the what is it. So yeah, thank you for letting me share that with you. And it's one of those projects I'm pretty proud of. And I was invited, I put my proposal in, it was probably the end of the year. It was probably like around this time. And I found out I had been selected in early January. I received my official invitation, and I couldn't get down to see my piece, the artifact that I had been assigned. I didn't get to see that until February. Also, at the time, I had I'd herniated 2 discs in my neck, and then was fired from my job. So I can laugh about it now. But while I was making this quilt, I was recovering from a neck injury. I mean, basically like a whiplash kind of situation, that herniated discs in my neck, and was newly jobless. And I created this thing over the summer. And it was a race against time, because I had to have it ready for an August show hanging, and a early September show opening. So yeah. All right, guys, let's get into some cotton, the heritage of cotton. So what do you guys think about this so far? I think that, so Sherlock helpfully looked up to find out who MDC Crawford was. He's a man named Morris. And I love the fact that DC, his middle name is DeCamp. And I don't know, I would have thought that DeCamp is one word, but apparently Morris thought of it as being 2 words. So he calls himself MDC Crawford. He wrote this book in 1924, I think. And I think I put 1931. I need to fix that. Yeah, 1924. And he was a fellow at the American History Museum in New York. I'm sorry, the American Museum of Natural History. Ugh. American History Museum's in DC. Yeah, so he's a former research associate in textiles and a fellow at the American Museum of Natural History. He was also the research editor of women's wear. So I guess if he knows about cotton. So we are on chapter 2, and this is called Primitive Culture. And we looked at some of or a plate on Monday. So I'll just hold that up. I'm not going to go over this plate again, but you see all of the things that he documented. I'm sure these are out of the Natural History Museum. This is the kind of stuff I think about the Natural History Museum here in, I say here, I'm not in DC, but I'm close. So in DC, and, a lot of the stuff they own, the Hope Diamond and the dinosaur bones and Egyptian mummies and that kind of stuff. It seems that in New York, the New York Museum probably has like the same kind of stuff. I've actually never been there. Much as I've read many, many books, the mixed up files of Mrs. Baisley, Frank Weiler notwithstanding, I have never been to the Natural History Museum. So, to remind you, we are reading The Heritage of Cotton by MDC Crawford, 1924, Chapter 2, Primitive Culture. It is natural that the entire problem of textiles should be confused with the single modern phase of cloth making. The woven web plays so important a part in modern life, we forget that in primitive cultures it does not appear until a comparatively late period. Spinning, weaving, and dyeing in the dawn ages are independent arts which served the needs of society separately for an infinitely longer period than when combined. That's kind of interesting to think about. The need for string, that's spinning. The need to put string together for as an entire like cloth, that's a different thing. And then dyeing it, making it another color is obviously seen as different. But today we look at these things as kind of being in, like, you can't really tease them apart necessarily. Dyeing, I kind of think sits off to the side a little bit, but kind of reminds me of, when I learned that reading and writing are kind of two separate skills that can be learned separately. I can't imagine knowing how to read but not being able to write. That's strange to me, because I feel like they're it's really hard to separate those two things. But the pedagogy and the physiological ways that our brain work, those two things really are separated. So I guess it's kind of the same thing, So Jared says, I saw it written as D' camp and also DE camp. Yeah, still I think decamp is one word. I mean, in terms of a name, like Von whatever. I mean, isn't decamp like kind of that same sort of thing? I don't know. Whatever Morris wants, we'll give Morris. I'm going to call it Morris, though. All right. My purpose in this chapter is to correlate in a brief sketch the basic principles of the textile arts and to show those in their simplest and most elemental forms. To outline the primitive stages of evolution up to the time when loom and spindle, the first crude essays in design, color, and the deliberate production of cloth, bring the story within the historic limit of our own hemisphere in Asia. Spinning, the act of combining two or more comparatively weak filatal elements through twisting into a comparatively strong yarn, cord, or thread, proceeds by a full cultural cycle, the crudest idea of weaving. We have still to find any civilization, archaic or modern, so elemental as not to be proficient in the arts of spinning. Almost every conceivable material, both animal and vegetable, have been used by primitive people for cordage. The list is endless. Our earliest ancestors evidently conducted a constant search in nature to find materials to answer their varying filatal needs. Okay, Filatal. What does that mean? He's now used this word twice. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. This must be something, skills? I mean, is it based on skill? I don't know. There are tribes today in inaccessible jungles who have no knowledge of weaving in any of its forms, who neither make baskets nor pottery, nor practice the most rudimentary agriculture, but who still know how to spin and have apparently always possessed this knowledge. Aren't there still tribes in like Papua New Guinea? I'm wondering if they would fall into this category. Even among the few races who cannot produce fire by artificial means, the art of spinning is a familiar practice. It is safe, therefore, to reckon cord making as among the first technical achievements of men. Still, there must have been a time when man did not know how to spin. To spell it again, okay, philatal, Filatal. There is no doubt that early man developed in continental areas and was a companion of dangerous carnivorous beasts and faced these dangers with only his native shrewdness and a certain swift strength as his protection. Strong as were his arms, they were no match for the bears. Terrible as was the grip of his blunt fingers, it was as nothing to the rending claws of the tiger. If he could not devise some weapon that would equalize these odds, he must have perished in the contest. So we're going to get to the fact that cordage saved us from the bears and the tigers. And probably the lions, too. Oh, my. From immemorial silt, from cave debris, from river drift and marl pit, wherever in our dawning man made his lair home, we find jagged stones, rounded on one side, small enough to cup in the hollow of the hand, yet large and heavy and sharp enough to be a dangerous weapon at close quarters. We call these hand stones, the first tool weapon of the human race. To conceive even so elemental a weapon, man had to break up pieces of flint and use judgment in the selection of the most suitable fragments. No doubt, with the aid of this stone, he fashioned a club of gnarled wood. This was a reasonable sequence of ideas, since the act of striking, throwing, and stabbing are natural movements. Oh my gosh. Throwing, striking, stabbing, it's natural. At such time, there must have become a man to whom the jagged handstone and the wooden club were insufficient. Oh my. So drew it as filatal, like just some word that Morris has made up. I'll try to do a little research after this and see if we can figure it out. He did not accept the universe as he found it. In other words, he thought. Oh. He learned to make this clear distinction between the club and the handstone. With the club, he could strike a shrewd blow beyond the reach of danger, and this sufficed for the lesser beasts. Oh, really? Quiltish can't find it either. So Morris has made up a word, or it's a word that's just not in our dictionaries anymore. With the stone, he could strike a downright blow, which even the greater beast respected. Yet to strike this blow, he must come perilously within the reach of claws and fangs. If a way might be devised to combine the comparative security of the club with the force and impact of the stone, it were a great matter. But stone is stone and wood is wood, and excellent though each may be in itself, according to its nature, they will not grow together. Some hint he may have received from the intertwining creeper, the tough lianas coiled like serpents around the boughs of trees. Lianas, coiled. Okay. Or the strong sinews in the legs of the deer, and the auric might have given him the first idea. No question, he has dragged these out again and again to study mutely their peculiar nature, to experiment with their slender toughness. In the ends, he loops these sinews about the stone and attempts to fasten it to the end of the club. He learns that if he doubles these sinews, they are better than single. But if he not only doubles them, but twists them, this double and twisted element is not only still stronger, but the spiral character of the twists forms a friction-producing surface, which prevents the binding from slipping. Okay, so Morris has given us a word that doesn't exist. This twisting of sinews together is spinning. Spinning indeed in its crudest form, but still true spinning. He has combined with the aid of his strong fingers two comparatively weak filatal elements. Okay, he's used this word now 3 times. Filatal. I'm guessing maybe he's meaning maybe he's just meaning primitive. Maybe it's meaning primitive. And fashioned of them one comparatively strong cord. And this suffices for his purpose. Stone hammers will be fashioned to wooden handles by this means for more thousands of years than there are centuries in modern history. Well, yes, fibers, but also, yeah, spinning, the act of combining two or more comparatively weak filatal elements. Maybe? Let's see, what was the other use of this word? Answer their varying filatal needs. Yeah, so filament. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking, like filament, a string. He's just using, yeah. We'll find out. I'll get to the bottom of this. Let's see. This twisted cord of sinew marks a great... so wait a sec. This, there's a footnote to this last sentence. So stone hammers will be fashioned to wood handles by this means for more thousands of years than there are centuries in modern history. So the footnote to that is, I am well aware that stone axes and points of stone have been secured in holes bored in wooden hafts. Whether this method preceded the binding of sinews or not makes little difference in this narrative, for I am describing the primitive development of textiles and not the serial culture of man. My hope is to drive home in a few examples the importance of textiles before cloth making. Okay. This twisted cord of sinew marks a great change in human life. New uses for cordage quickly developed. For example, man had noticed that flint broke in razor-edge flakes. It would not be long, therefore, before he would fasten with twisted sinews one of these sharp-edged flakes to the end of a slender sapling. He would then have a stabbing stick or spear capable of piercing the toughest hide. This would rapidly develop into a javelin or throwing spear. Fish lines, snares, in some parts of the world the sling, and nets would be made from twisted sinews or tough grasses and shredded barks at about this era of culture. The idea of cordage of any kind is so universal that it might well have had multiple origins, the idea occurring to many men in many parts of the world, separated by great reaches of time. The next use to which cordage was applied is so unique, so original, that it could have but one single source of origin. Oh my. This second man is the great primitive trilogy of inventors. Let's see, this second man in the great primitive trilogy of inventors must have been gifted with analytical reasoning powers, been able to carry his deductions through several phases of mental experiment before he actually put his ideas into operation. In other words, the final results of his thought was highly composite. This man sees in cord and wood and point of flint new and undreamed possibilities. To his mind, flint is the most perfect material, nor can he conceive of a stronger, tougher cord than that made of twisted sinews. He therefore turns his investigation towards the properties of wood. He is familiar with many kinds, and each has its separate function in his life. Needles should be called stabbing sticks. I agree. Chiefly, however, his interest centers about the smooth-barked, straight saplings, which are best suited for haft of stone hammer or shaft for flint-tipped spear. In making new weapons, he has often marveled how the strength of the sapling grew as he put forth his own strength. The more he bent a sapling, the greater grew its power to resist, and if it escaped occasionally from his firm grasp in its upward swing, more often than not it gave him a shrewd blow. This was an indication perhaps of displeasure on the part of the wood. This wood makes me angry. And yet, once the wood had been subdued, the spirit of discontent left it, and it became his willing servant and stout friend. In time, it occurred to him that a sapling might be more easily severed with the jagged stone edge if one end were tied down. Here he discovers that it is not only a convenience, but a miracle, for the strength he had marveled at in the bent sapling and the pliant toughness of the cord, when combined, froze into a silent struggle between cord and wood. He runs his calloused hand along the straining curve of the bent sapling. It is not unlike his own flexed muscle when he puts forth his might. This is starting to get a little, this is like, Harlequin romance of the primitive man. Yet it is still the familiar sapling of his many experiences. In wonder, he looks at the cord he himself has fashioned from the sinews of his auroch. An auroch must be some animal, and it is spelled Auroch. I don't know. Maybe it just means his quarry. It is just the same cord he has known for many friendly days, and yet how different. Cord and wood have suddenly grown alive in this new relationship. Like a child, he touches the straining cord, and it answers with a deep, rich note of music. It is the spirit of the wood making protest at being bound. Nonetheless, he touches it again with the same result, and yet that note, deep as it was, strong as it was not the tone of anger. It is like the call of his mate. Oh my. It is like the call of his mate, like the song that springs to his own hairy lips when the long days come again with the flowers and the fish leap in the shallows. Good Lord, Morris. Oh. He strikes it tentatively with his flint hammer, and the cord almost snatches it from his hand. He pushes against the cord with the blunt end of his spear, and the spear springs away like a living thing, and the cord hums with satisfaction. What are this man's processes of thought? How does he arrive from one experiment safely to the next? From dream to idea, from idea to action, from action to accomplishment. Coulter says would hate to be stuck beside this guy at a dinner party. Why, he would titillate you about stone carving tools. Oh my goodness. No man can say, the night of our long climb is lit by the brilliance of a few great intellects, nor is there any rule to measure either their mental processes or the sequence of their appearance. Among the truly great inventors of all the ages, I place the bow maker. And by this he means pew, and not bow. In all eternity, there must have been the twilight instant when this miracle was still but the arched sapling and the singing cord, and that instant when the idea flamed like a comet in the midnight firmament. And as clear as his own image in a crystal pool, he sees how all things, strength of cord, toughness of wood, power to throw objects aside that touch the cord, have always meant, must always mean one thing, the bow. He has bent his last sapling and attached to either end the twisted cord. In moist, triumphant hand, he holds the fruit of his thought and listens to the music of the throbbing cord. You know what, Morris? I think Morris was really a little softcore romance writer. It will throw a stone further and surer than his sinewy arm. This is good, but in his mind there is still greater thought. For if he himself, the creator of the bow, may throw a spear, why may not this creature of his mind also throw its spear? He has not yet learned to call them arrows. He selects a straight stick, scarce larger than his finger, and yet long enough to span the arch of the bow. He tips it with a flake of flint and rubs a notch in the end. Timidly, he draws his first arrow, releases it, and follows its flight with dazzled eyes. Again and yet again, he performs this miracle with increasing satisfaction. Now he fashions a bow just to the verge of his might to draw and uses great care in selecting arrow shafts, in balancing the tips. And later, either he or some of his descendants fasten to the butt the guiding feathers of the fenny goose. Now comes the never-to-be-forgotten hour when he makes first essay of his new powers against his ancient enemies. He sees the arrow redden in the heart's blood of the snarling wolf. He sees the gray feathers encrimsoned against the tawny shoulder of the tiger devil. His hour has come at last, and he walks upright. No longer shall the lurking shadows of the forest trail drive him chattering in fear from the protecting treetops. He is the power, safe himself, to send from afar a lethal message. Men will come and go for countless ages, and the castellated ice will cover completely this verdant forest, where now he roams in the sweet security of mastership. Nor will men ever devise a more perfect, more certain weapon till the swing of the cycles bring gunpowder and the rifled barrel. Wow. And here I thought that Ruth Finley was a little bit like overwrought. This guy. And all these, axe, snare, sling, and bow, are in a sense results of the twisted sinews of the first corn baker. Okay. The first weaver was he who made the first fishweir. So fishweir are those, if I remember correctly, it's like a basket that kind of, it's kind of shaped like a tube, but the opening was, I think it would be closed on one end. And on the other end has like sort of branches of like the basket body that stick out, and they get turned on the inside. So basically the fish can go in, but if they try to go out, they're going to get stuck on those pieces that are sticking in. So I think that's what a fishweir is, I think. But it also might be like a purse seine net. I can't remember. I know I watched, I think it was Medieval Farm. It was one of those wonderful British shows where the archaeologists go and live. And I remember them making fishweirs, and I think that's what they are. Those basket things. Okay. He had observed that it was a little easier to secure his prey in parts of the stream where a wind-blown tree formed an obstruction which permitted the fish to escape only in one direction. Obviously, the gods of the forest sent these fortuitously fallen trees in answer to the offerings of the tribe. Still, the gods were notably poor fishermen and did not send either enough trees or trees in the right place to suit the growing demand of the ravenous appetites. This man dares to imitate the gods to prove indeed upon their careless methods. He selects a shallow ripple between two deep pools, drives in upright sticks in a loop to suit the vagaries of the water. Between these, he intertwines saplings of pliable vines so that the water may escape, but the fish be retained. Okay, yeah, this is what I thought it was. All that he thought he was doing, all that he hoped to accomplish, and all so far he ever knew he had accomplished, was to build a fish trap in imitation of wind-blown trees. As a matter of fact, he is the father of weavers, and the latest, most sumptuous fabric of our times is covered by the same generic definition as this rude texture of upright staffs and intertwining withes. Now, the note for this page is, note, this is not a footnote, it's just a note. The missile bow, whatever its form, I regard as a comparatively late development in culture, preceded by the throwing stick and sling, and, in my opinion, a probable development from the throwing stick and nowhere to be regarded a direct invention in any of its existing forms. From studies made with the late Frank Hamilton Cushing, I consider all missile bows to be genetically related and as having a common rather than several independent origins. They all, at least in my opinion, have an identical morphology. And this is Stuart Cullen, Brooklyn Institute Museum, Brooklyn, New York. For weaving is the act of interlacing at right angles two filatal elements. Okay, filatal has got to mean filament. It's got to mean string. Your string needs. Filatal, the needs of your string. So two filatal elements in such a way that friction holds them in one compact entity. Not long after this great invention of the fishweir, the growing wealth of the tribe in food gave individuals leisure for further experiment, and mats of rushes were intertwined in imitation of the fishweir, and wattled huts built originally above a spearing platform as protection from the wind and rain began to make their appearance. Before long came that period of culture when man left his caves and treetop homes and lived in spiled villages above the shallow waters of lakes. Here he was reasonably secure from danger of attack from marauding animals and devastating forest fires. The task of fishing was relegated to the women. And women not only repaired but built the fishweirs. So all women came to a certain skill and understanding of the arts of interlacing two sets of sticks into a strong open texture. In other words, became weavers. Now, I'm curious to know what evidence upholds this. I don't know that I've heard a whole lot about primitive women being the fishers. Yeah, I mentioned earlier about words being spelled differently in the past. Yeah, I'm wondering if that's what's coming of some of this stuff. I have noticed there's something I noticed he spelled like the Canadian way or the UK way. I can't remember what word it was. Women's life was changed by the weapon ingenuity of man from one of nervous dread to comparative security and comfort. Okay, Morris, you are. You have no evidence that women were like, whew, not nervous or dreading anymore. My man's got a spear. No longer does she clutch her latest born and her pearls, and so perilously and preciously handicapped flee when the tiger slips like a gray flame into the clearing. Now he may roar his loudest, tantalized by the delicious scents wafted across the water to his quivering nose. If he shows his evil, wrinkled face at the bridge tree, the men will fill him full of arrows, and there will be a great feast that evening. Roasted tiger. And the chief will have a fine new tiger skin to sit upon before the council fire. Yeah, definitely clutching her pearls. Oh, God. I think what we're getting ready to read here, all of this definitely has probably been refuted since 1924. Okay. No longer does she huddle in mute agony in the corner of the cave, with her little whimpering bundle of tenderness, while the gaunt, silent men return day by day, fishless from the pitiless river. Now plenty warms her life, and there is still to eat and eat again. Her man, lean-hipped, burly-shouldered, with corded, hairy arms and soft, anxious eyes. Do we know what kind of man that suits Morris? He is either a man who desires another man, or he is a man who is definitely like a frustrated romance writer. Because he has really described the burly man in detail, and all we hear about the women are just, poor scared lady in the corner. Morris, I'm on to you. A bow of seasoned wood, a flint-tipped spear, an edged stone cunningly hafted in a stout sapling, the keen delight of the hunt, the riotous joy of the evening feast, and the satisfaction of talk with his peers around the council fire. For him these suffice, but not for her. She demands some outlet for the pent-up energies, some direction for the creative instinct fostered by the new relationship she has developed towards this particularly tiny wattled hut, carpeted with rush mats and the skins of animals. Okay, so what he's just described here are the Victorian women who, now that they have servants and sewing machines, can just sit about and do crafts because they have nothing better to do. Come on! You know that prehistoric women were busting their butts just as much as these men were. So one evening, when her man returns from the hunt, he is shown the first crude basket. For the woman in her new life has always something to carry. Oh, my Lord. First, the fish must be transported from the weir. Then there are the swift, timid forays into the adjoining forest to gather nuts and fruits, berries, edible roots and grasses, which have become an important part of the daily menu. The basket is, perhaps, the first device created by human ingenuity that may safely be called a luxury. It is weaving, a direct result of the fish weir and mattings. The man looks at it with superior toleration. Superior toleration. Okay. Look at your basket, woman. Oh, it's really cute. Not quite like my wonderful spear, but... It is obviously neither weapon nor trap, nor can one make upon it interesting and satisfactory noises. It seems, however, upon reflection, to be an overturned hut, a sort of propitiatory offering to the gods of the winds to dissuade them from blowing down the real hut. Well, that's a stretch. Such a ritualistic theory is sound, for in spite of the gods' power for mischief, they are notably easy to deceive. Oh ho! That night he showed it at the council fire of the elders. They turned it over, peered into it, smelled it, and wisely shook their heads. Women's work of small moment. Nonetheless, he carried home in it that night the arrow points he had fashioned while listening to a learned discussion around the fire regarding the habits of the wolf who eats the sun each night. The men, through better organization and improved weapons, have driven the more dangerous animals from the little clearing on the shore, and the woman finds in the forest more and more things of value. Roots, grasses, fruits, and berries she can gather with more or less impunity, and for these she needs more and different types of basketry. She finds as well that certain of these foods can be dried and stored, and this is a further occasion for weaving baskets, and hence increases her quest for fibers that may be spun and woven. To all of these forces there comes the added incentive of color, the desire for chromatic sensation. Heretofore, fear, hunger, desire for security, and rude comfort have entirely governed the quest. This I believe. Now comes the first great aesthetic impulse, latent always, awaiting this hour to blossom into centuries of beauty. No one studying the arts of primitive people can fail to be impressed by their passionate love for color and design. Almost every implement, every object capable of being designed and stained is decorated. Primitive peoples have a keener, if narrower, vision of nature than civilized man. They see animals, fishes, and reptiles, as well as vegetable matter, in all varying forms, and can identify the objects of their quest by the least shade of color visioned. They acquire fine distinctions in color senses, since it is necessary to distinguish the tawny shade of the lion's mane from the dun color of the deer, to catch the glint of the fish's scales in the deepest pool, to distinguish at a glance the edible from the poisonous mollusk. Okay. The marked preference of all savage people for different tones of red, which still survives in our own consciousness, is because this color has always pleasant associations, whether it be in fire, the warm blood of the slaughtered animals, the tones of ripened fruit, or the clay which protects from annoying swarms of insects. But there is obviously a vast intellectual difference between seeing color in nature and reacting to color, and in deliberately using color to produce effects. The first coloring was, no doubt, accidental. The juices of fruit, the liquor of certain shellfishes and roots and edible barks, left upon the glistening skin visible traces, and between these colors and the satisfaction of eating, there was a definite mental reaction. So gradually, the art of body painting and staining developed. I need only cite a few of the more familiar instances to establish this first of all arts in its proper status. The little peoples who lived beyond the walls in northern Britain were called by the Romans Picts, and he's spelling it P-I-C-K-S. I believe it's actually P-I-C-T-S in today's history. So they're called by the Romans Picts, the painted people, because of their habit of tattooing their bodies. The Sioux warrior, the Zuni priest, the African spearman, even the Australian bushman. Okay, I don't know what he's trying to say here, but in parentheses he says lowest in human culture. Morris, no. All of these decorate themselves in marvelous and highly significant patterns. It remained, however, for the Maoris of New Zealand to carry body and facial tattooing to the full dignity of a major art. The habit in India of painting with henna the nails of famous beauties, the toilet rituals of Egypt and old Cathay, perhaps even the ardent love for cosmetics in this day, are all survivals of the same primordial practices. To transfer this love of color to objects they themselves created, as well as to their own body, was not a difficult transition. The value of a textile fiber would then be determined by the ease with which it accepted color. As soon, therefore, as any advance guard of the human race migrated to a country where cotton grew, the brilliant blossoms and the opening pods of lint would soon attract attention, and when it was found that the cotton fiber had a great receptivity for certain dyes, it would become a favorite for its aesthetic rather than its utilitarian qualities. Oh, Druid's got some info about the Picts. I'll read that in a second. And so this tiny filament begins its history as one of the many, perhaps at the beginning of the least important of the textile fibers. Perhaps at the beginning, the least important of the textile fibers. When this was in time, even in relationship to culture, it is impossible to say. It is, of course, possible that these qualities might have been independently discovered by totally distinct races in both Asia and the New World. One thing only is reasonably clear. Cotton does not belong in the same class with the first sturdy, rough fibers of usage. Its choice was determined because of its qualities as a medium of beauty rather than utility. Interesting. And that is chapter 2. So Druid says, I knew you would know about this. Let's see. The Picts were first appeared in written records in the late 3rd century AD. They were first noticed by the Romans in AD 297 when a Roman writer described the Picts, an Irish, attacking Hadrian's Wall. The Picts were the largest kingdom in Dark Age Scotland and repelled the conquest of the Romans and Anglos. The Picts disappeared from history by the end of the first millennium. They're believed to be the ancestors of indigenous people of Scotland, such as the Caledones or the Vaco Magi. The name Picti is Latin term that means painted ones. The name may refer to their custom of body painting or tattoo. They're known for their symbol stones, which were carved on stones, cave walls, bones, and fine jewelry, or silver jewelry. The symbols likely conveyed identities such as personal names. Oh, interesting. Okay. Yeah, I knew the Picts were like their predecessors of the Druids, right? They were they kind of the ancestors of sort of the Druids, yeah, the people that worshipped. Am I right about this? That worship nature, and I feel like that's where they come in the timeline of ancient history. Yeah, I feel like they kind of, well, we've talked about, oh gosh, with a number of the books we've talked about, the history lessons that we get in the U.S. And I feel like the Picts are, when we get to talk about European and British Isles history, we kind of just get little blips of it. And Romans obviously get a much larger discussion in history, I think, here in the U.S., simply because of government. Yeah. Oh, okay. The Druids, the priests of the Picts, not only continued their existence following the Celtic conquest of the British Isles, but also imposed themselves on the conquerors, whom they converted to Druidism. Okay. All right. So I was a little bit right. Well, awesome. So, okay. What have we learned now? Morris was frustrated in some way. Perhaps he wanted to be a romance writer. Perhaps he was pining for some beautiful, sexy, Victorian. He's thinking about Everett. Yeah, it's interesting to me that he had lots to say about the burly, hairy men of prehistory and really nothing other than the women were in the corner cowering until their men got spears. I love it. Oh, goodness. So I think this is going to be an interesting book. The idea, I've read a lot about spinning. His homoerotica is not very well disguised. I'm going to have to say, yeah. Yeah. So you guys are getting a 2-for-1 here at the end of the year. You're learning about cotton and you're getting a little bit of a wow, bow chicka bow bow. All right, guys, I am going to sign off for now. As always, thank you so much. I hope this is entertaining at the very least. And I hope Morris is going to give us some good solid stuff about cotton. He seems to be in love with cotton. Like, cotton is beautiful. It's art. And then we have these old nasty sinews that they tied stuff up with. But the cotton. Oh, the cotton. So hopefully this is going to be interesting. I think it is. So, yeah. So have a super duper weekend, you guys. We are creeping ever close to the end of the year. Ah! Oh my gosh, it's going to be here before we know it, you know? Well, I will see you guys very soon. Thank you very much. I hope that you will join me and Jill on Tuesday. I don't know if we're going to have QuiltCon rejects ready for Tuesday. It might be a little bit further into the month, but I think we're definitely planning to do that this month. So keep an eye out. We'd love to have you there to look at people's quilts, because we want to give everybody a chance to have people's eyes on their stuff. So, all right, guys, have a wonderful afternoon, and I will see you soon. Mwah!